The left wing fell, the right wing vanished, and the emperor stood alone. The air turned black, not with night, it was barely past midday, but with arrows. Thousands of them, launched in perfect arcs from the Seljuk horsemen who circled like wolves. They came not in one wave, but in endless rhythm. Shoot, retreat, reload, return. The Byzantine infantry, packed too tightly in the narrow valley, had no room to dodge. Shields splintered. Men fell clutching their throats, their eyes, their backs. On the left wing, General Branios fought like a man possessed. His men formed a shield wall, holding the high ground near a dry ravine. For a time they resisted. They even drove back a charge of Turkmen lancers. But the arrows found gaps. Horses panicked. A stray bolt took Branios in the leg. He refused to fall, shouting orders, dragging himself onto a fresh mount, until a second arrow punched through his neck. He died still facing the enemy. With his fall, the left wing collapsed. Men broke formation, fleeing toward the center, only to become targets in the open. The Seljuks didn't pursue. They herded. They funneled the fleeing soldiers into killing zones, where the archers waited, calm, methodical, reloading. And still, the right wing did nothing. Andronikos Doukas stood at the head of the elite optimatoi, the finest cavalry in the Eastern Army, fully armored, fresh and untouched by battle. He had watched the left wing burn. He had seen the arrows fall. He had heard the screams. Yet he gave no order to advance. His officers urged him. "We must support the emperor. The center is exposed. If we charge now, we can turn the flank." Andronikos looked toward Romanos, a distant figure in purple, surrounded by the imperial guard, trying to reorganize the shattered lines. Then he looked west, toward Constantinople, and he said quietly, "We hold position." No fanfare, no dramatic declaration, just silence and stillness, as if the emperor were already dead. The Varangian guard, sensing the doom, tightened their circle around Romanos, axes raised, feet planted, but they were fewer now. The ranks had thinned. The dust was thick with blood and sweat. The wounded cried out. The dead were already being stripped by scavengers. Romanos turned, scanning the battlefield, searching for the one force that could still save the day. He saw the optimatoi, still mounted, still intact, still doing nothing. A cold horror spread through him, not of death, but of recognition. This was not hesitation. This was not fear. This was betrayal. He turned to his closest aide, a loyal Armenian officer named Huram, Joseph Tarshaniotz. His voice barely above the din. "Did the Dukas order this?" Joseph said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes, wide, knowing, full of pity, answered everything. And in that instant, Romanos understood. He had not just been outmaneuvered by Alp Arslan. He had been abandoned by his own empire. The horn sounded again, not Byzantine, Seljuk. From all sides now, a closing net. The horse archers parted, and through the dust, the Ghulams, the Sultan's elite slave cavalry, advanced in perfect formation, lances lowered. The emperor raised his sword, not in hope, in defiance, and the last loyal force in the Byzantine army braced for the end. He ruled an empire of millions. Now he knelt before a man who owned only a tent. They brought him in at dusk. Romanos Diogenes, once autocrator. Of the Romans, commander of legions, heir to Constantine and Theodosius, now stripped of armor, his face streaked with blood and dust, one arm bound with a torn cloth to slow the bleeding. He walked, not dragged. Even in defeat, he carried himself like a soldier. His eyes, though shadowed with pain, did not waver. Before him, in the center of the Seljuk camp, sat Alp Arslan. Not on a throne, not beneath a golden canopy, but on a simple campaign chair, wrapped in a woolen cloak against the mountain chill. Around him, emirs and commanders stood in silence, hands on sword hilts, watching the fallen emperor with a mix of awe and suspicion. Alp Arslan did not rise. He studied Romanos, not as a trophy, but as a man. Then finally he spoke. "Tell me," he said in Persian, his voice calm, "who was it that betrayed you?" Romanos flinched, not from the question, but from its precision. He said nothing. Alp Arslan sighed. "I already know, the Dukas. They feared your strength, so they broke you." A pause, then softer. What a tragedy that a man of your rank should be undone not by his enemy, but by his own. Silence fell. Then, to the shock of every man present, the Sultan stood and ordered the chains removed. "He is not a prisoner," Arslan declared. "He is a guest." That night, beneath a sky ablaze with stars, the two rulers dined together, not as victor and vanquished, but as equals. Wine was served, not the cheap grape of the frontier, but fine vintage from captured Byzantine stores. Dishes of lamb, honeyed bread, and spiced rice were shared. Arslan questioned Romanus on Roman law, on the structure of the themes, on the politics of Constantinople. Romanus, wary at first, found himself answering, then speaking freely, even bitterly, of the court, the ducas, the decay he had tried and failed to stop. At one point, the Sultan leaned forward. "You wanted to reclaim Anatolia," he said. "But Anatolia was never yours to lose. It belongs to those who guard it, and for years, and you did not." Romanus had no answer. Later, as the fire burned low, Arslan made his terms. Romanus would be released. He would return to Constantinople, but he would pay a ransom, 1.5 million gold numismata. He would cede key frontier fortresses, Edessa, Antioch, possibly even Manzikert itself, and he would send his son as a hostage, not in chains, but as a gesture of trust. "I do not seek your empire," Arslan said. "I seek peace, and if you honor this treaty, our children may trade instead of fight." Romanus, exhausted, nodded. Not in joy, not in surrender, but in something rarer, recognition. This was not the barbarian Byzantium had painted. This was a ruler, wise, disciplined, even noble. As he was led to a tent of his own, warm, furnished, guarded not by jailers but by honor guards, Romanus looked back at the Sultan, still seated by the fire, gazing into the flames. And for the first time since the campaign began, the emperor felt something he had not expected. Not fear, not rage, shame. He had come to crush a savage. Instead, he had been bested by a king. And worse, he had been shown mercy by a man who had every right to kill him. He survived the battlefield, but not his own capital. The road back to Constantinople was not a march. It was a pilgrimage through ruin. Romanos Diogenes traveled slowly, his body still healing, his mind haunted by the terms he had agreed to at Arslan's camp. He carried no army now, only a small escort and the fragile hope that honor still meant something in Byzantium. He had kept his word. He had secured peace. He had preserved the empire from total collapse. And though the ransom would strain the treasury and the ceded fortresses would sting, he believed, perhaps foolishly, that a soldier emperor who returned alive could still command loyalty. But as he crossed into Bithynia, the signs began to change. Villages that once flew the imperial banner now bore the insignia of the ducas. Tax collectors wore new seals. Local governors greeted him with cold formality, or not at all. Then came the news. Michael VII Ducas had been crowned sole emperor. The Senate, that ancient whispering council of aristocrats, had declared Romanus deposed the moment word reached Constantinople that he had been captured. A prisoner cannot rule, they proclaimed. The throne must be preserved. But it wasn't just preservation, it was usurpation. Andronikos Ducas, the very man who had abandoned him at Manzikert, had returned to the capital not as a disgraced commander, but as a hero, the man who saved the army from total annihilation. He had spun the defeat into a tale of Romanus's recklessness, his unholy war against a peaceful sultan, his surrender to a pagan. The truth, buried beneath layers of silk and slander. Romanus pressed on. He sent envoys. He appealed to the clergy, to the people, to the army units still loyal to him in the West. He would not accept this. He was the lawful emperor. He had not abdicated. He had not surrendered the crown. He would take it back. Near Kotyaion, in the heart of Phrygia, his small force clashed with a larger army loyal to Michael VII. It was not a great battle. No chronicles would sing of it, but it was decisive. Romanus fought like a man with nothing left to lose, and for a moment he held the field. But then, betrayal again. Units that had sworn allegiance to him, men who had eaten at his table, turned at the critical moment. The lines collapsed. His generals fled. And as the dust settled, Romanus was captured. Not by Turks, not by fate, but by Romans. He was taken, bound to the imperial palace in Constantinople. Not to a dungeon, to the heart of power, to the very throne room where he had once ruled. There, in the cold marble silence, he was brought before Michael VII, a man of soft hands and softer will, who could not even look him in the eye. The sentence was not death, it was worse. Byzantine law was clear. A deposed emperor must be blinded, not killed, for that would make him a martyr, but rendered forever incapable of rule. And the method, not quick, not merciful. Two men stepped forward with hot irons. Romanus did not beg. He did not curse. He only said in a voice that carried through the hall, "You blind the man who saved the empire from ruin, and call yourselves its heirs?" The iron came down, once, then again. Screams echoed through the palace, not just from pain, but from the sheer injustice of it. Guards turned away, eunuchs wept. Even the executioners hesitated, but the deed was done. As Romanus collapsed, blood streaming down his face, a single voice, cold, composed, cut through the silence from the shadows. "Then he must die." No one saw who spoke, but everyone knew. The Ducas had erased their rival, not with war, but with darkness. No army, no emperor, no order, just open gates and 1,000 tents moving west. Anatolia did not fall in a day. It bled. After the blinding of Romanus, after the crowning of Michael VII, the empire did not collapse. It retreated. The great fortresses of the east, Theodosiopolis, Sebastia, Melitene, still flew the double-headed eagle. The tax rolls still listed villages, fields, garrisons. On paper, Byzantium held the heartland, but in truth, the soldiers were gone, sent west to fight civil wars, drafted into private armies, deserted. The granaries stood empty, the watchtowers crumbled, the roads once patrolled by imperial strategoi became the domain of bandits, Turkmen raiders, and wandering mercenaries. And into this silence, they came. Not as an army, not with banners or declarations, but as families. Turkmen tribes, august horsemen from the Central Asian steppes, began to cross the frontier in small groups, then larger ones. They were not always loyal to Alp Arslan. Some were rebels, some were fugitives. Others were simply seeking pasture for their herds, water for their children, land that was no longer defended. They did not conquer, they settled. A shepherd would appear on a hillside near Iconium, then another, then a dozen. They'd build a oba, a circular tent of felt and wood, then a pen for sheep, then a well. A year later, a wooden mosque would rise, simple, unadorned, its call to prayer the first in a land that had only known church bells. Local Byzantine villagers, exhausted by taxes, by conscription, by the endless churn of imperial failure, did not resist. Some fled west toward Nicaea, toward Constantinople. Others stayed, and slowly, quietly, began to speak the new tongue. They traded wheat for wool, they intermarried, they converted, not under sword, but through the dervish who healed the sick, the imam who settled disputes, the bey who offered protection where the emperor no longer could. Byzantine officials still came, once a year maybe, to collect taxes. But they found fewer households, fewer names, more empty fields. And when they demanded payment, the answer was always the same. We answer to the bey now. In the cities, the change was slower. In Amorium, the Greek elite still gathered in the agora, still prayed in the cathedral, still wrote letters to Constantinople begging for troops. But the troops never came. And as the decades passed, the city walls, once repaired every spring, began to crumble. The aqueducts cracked, the streets narrowed with makeshift homes. And then one day a Turkmen chieftain, not a sultan, not a general, but a man named Kilij Arslan, son of a Seljuk governor, rode into the city not as an invader, but as a landlord. He didn't sack it, he bought it, with gold, with promises, with alliances sealed through marriage. The old elite watched, powerless. The empire was too busy fighting Normans in Italy, rebels in the Balkans, and itself in the capital to care about a province that had already slipped away. And so, without a single great battle, Anatolia changed hands, not in fire, but in silence, not by force, but by absence. And in a small village near the Halys River, an old Greek priest, the last of his kind, stood at the edge of a field where a Turkish family was planting olive trees. He said nothing, But as the sun set behind the mountains, he whispered to himself in a voice barely louder than the wind, "This land is no longer ours." She wasn't on the battlefield, but she won the war. In the years after Manzikert, while emperors rose and fell like waves upon a storm-tossed shore, one woman moved through the darkness with purpose. Anna d'Alassan. Not an empress, not a general, not even a ruler in name, but for decades she would be the true architect of Byzantium's last great revival. She had lived through it all: the decadence of the Macedonian dynasty, the decay of the Ducas, the reckless gamble of Romanos, the cowardly usurpation of Michael VII. She had survived exile, imprisonment, and the knife's edge of palace conspiracy. And when she placed her son, Alexios Komnenos, on the throne in 1081, she did not step aside. She ruled. From the moment Alexios seized power, not through inheritance, but through a coup forged in blood and secret alliances, Anna became the empire's unseen spine. She did not sit in council. She was the council. She did not command armies, but she ensured they were paid, supplied, and loyal, not to the crown, but to the komnenoi. And above all, she controlled the church. In Byzantium, power was not only military or political, it was spiritual. The Patriarch of Constantinople could crown an emperor or break him, and Anna, with the cunning of a theologian and the will of a general, secured the church's loyalty through a web of patronage, marriage ties, and calculated piety. She founded monasteries, donated relics, wept in public at liturgies. To the people, she was a saint. To her enemies, she was a spider. But her greatest triumph was not in gold or prayer. It was in survival. By the time Alexios took the throne, Anatolia was gone. Truly gone. The Seljuk Sultanate of Rum had established its capital at Iconium. Turkish beyliks dotted the interior. The once imperial heartland was now a patchwork of Turkic principalities, Sufi lodges, and frontier markets where Greek was no longer the tongue of power. Anna did not waste time mourning it. She looked west, she looked north, she looked to the sea, she rebuilt the navy, she forged alliances with the Venetians, giving them trade privileges that would one day haunt the empire, but buying survival now. She married her daughters into powerful families, binding the aristocracy to her house. She even exiled her own son when he threatened her authority, not with violence, but with a whispered order to the guards: take him to the monastery, let him pray for wisdom. And when the First Crusade arrived, that tide of Frankish knights promising to liberate the East, it was Anna who saw the truth before anyone else. They were not saviors. They were another kind of conqueror. She warned Alexios, "They will take more than they give. They will not obey, they will not leave." And when the Crusaders passed through Constantinople, wild-eyed and hungry for blood, it was Anna who ensured the city gates remained guarded, the bridges controlled, the food supplies rationed. She did not trust them, and she was right. But even her genius could not reverse the irreversible. One evening, from a balcony in the Mangana Palace, she stood alone, gazing eastward, toward the Anatolian plateau, where the sun set behind the distant Taurus mountains. A servant approached with news. Another fortress had fallen, another bishop had fled, another village now flew the crescent. She did not turn, she only whispered, so quietly the wind almost stole the words. "We saved Constantinople, but we lost the soul of the empire." No one saw it coming, no one wrote it down, but the world was never the same. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The name Manzikert faded from imperial decrees. No grand monument was raised to mark the battle. No feast day celebrated its memory. In Constantinople, it became a word spoken in hushed tones. Not a defeat, but a shame, buried beneath layers of prayer and propaganda. But in the highlands of Anatolia, the wind carried a different story. The call to prayer rose from minarets built on the ruins of basilicas. Turkish children played in fields once tilled by Greek farmers. Caravans bearing silk and spice moved along roads guarded not by Roman strategoi, but by Seljuk gassis. The language of the land changed, slowly, like a river shifting course, until the very names of towns became unrecognizable to those who had once ruled them. The Seljuk Sultanate of Rum took root, not as a temporary occupation, but as a new civilization. Persian in poetry, Turkic in blood, Islamic in faith, Anatolian in soul. And when that sultanate fell, another rose. From the ashes of Mongol invasions and Byzantine collapse, a small beylik on the frontier, led by a man named Osman, began to grow, the Ottoman Empire. No one in 1071 could have foreseen it. Not Romanos, bleeding in the dust. Not Alp Arslan, offering peace beneath a desert sky. Not the scholars of Baghdad or the patriarchs of Constantinople. And yet, it began here. Not with a world-shaking decree, not with a thunderous battle cry, but with a single act of betrayal in the fog of war, with a blinding in a palace chamber, with a frontier left unguarded, with 1,000 tents drifting westward, carried by wind and hope. This was not the end of Byzantium. Not yet. It would survive another 4 centuries, clinging to its capital, reinventing itself, playing the great powers against one another. But its fate was sealed the moment Anatolia slipped from its grasp. Because empires do not fall in a single day. They fall in silence. They fall when no one is watching. They fall not because their enemies are strong, but because their own grow blind, divided, deaf to the whispers of history. And so, when we speak of the rise of the Turks in Anatolia, of the Ottoman conquests, of the fall of Constantinople in 1453, of the birth of modern Turkey, we trace it back not to a single sword stroke, but to a moment of human failure. A general who chose loyalty to his family over his emperor, an aristocracy that valued power more than patriotism, an emperor who trusted duty more than instinct, and a land, fertile, sacred, ancient, that was simply abandoned. Manzikert was not the loudest battle in history, but it may have been the most consequential, because in the end, Anatolia was not lost to invasion. It was lost to betrayal, not stolen by an army, but given inch by inch, year by year, by those who were meant to protect it. And as the sun sets over the plains where Romanos once rode, and the call to prayer echoes across the same hills where Byzantine banners once flew, one truth remains. Anatolia was not lost in a day. It was stolen by silence.